So thank you, Venerable Carol. I'm really happy to be here, returning to Tse Chen Ling to do this teaching. Again, this is part of the 600 years since Lama Tsongkhapa passed away. Lama Tsongkhapa being the founder of the Gelugpa tradition that we practice in this tradition, the FPMT. And this, we're not studying a subject that Lama Tsongkhapa, as far as I know, composed anything on. We won't be using kind of his commentary on the root text that is by Buddha Maitreya it's called the Uttaratantra, which is these verses that go primarily to talk about Buddha nature, which is the main subject that we're going to be looking at. But nonetheless, everything that Lama Tsongkhapa taught is based on the concept of Buddha nature. The idea that he would teach an entire treatise on the path to enlightenment, and then also that's the sutra tradition, and then a whole set of discourses on the tantric tradition of achieving enlightenment. Well, it's based on the fact that we all can achieve enlightenment, that we all have Buddha nature. And a text that I will be referring to occasionally, a commentary, is by Gyaltsab, who many of you may recognize the name of. He was one of the heart disciples, the two spiritual sons of Lama Tsongkhapa. Gyaltsab usually has kind of the smiley face on the one side, and Kedrup is a bit stern looking on the other side. Right back here behind, over here, on that side. Anyway, so this is totally within the line of what the center here is doing in terms of this commemorating the 600 years since Lama Tsongkhapa passed, because his whole legacy is based on this concept. So let's just do... you got the prayer book. Let's do one time this praise to Buddha Shakyamuni. Normally it's recited 3, but tonight we'll just do this one time in order to kind of align ourselves with that idea of being really grateful to be able to follow the Buddha's teachings in this time, that these teachings through the kindness of the Buddha were given in discourses, but then also that we can benefit from them now due to all of the great masters who have kept these teachings alive. So it's on page 1 right there, that first full verse, just once. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Then go forward a few pages to the refuge verse, which is on page 8. Well, maybe we'll do the short mandala offering. I think it's just nice to create that kind of energy. If you're not familiar with the mandala offering, it's about making this vast, pure offering to all the Buddhas, all of our gurus, to receive their blessings, to be able to actualize these teachings in our own minds, and to receive them through their blessings of the Buddhas. So we'll just do this now, and we'll just do this in English. If you know the mudra, you can do the mudra as well. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryata Yami. And then refuge is the next verse. We'll do this once in English and then twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, daki chunyan gi pe sonam gi, drola penshir sangye drupar shog. Sangye chodang soki choknam la, jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi, daki chunyan gi pe sonam gi, drola penshir sangye drupar shog. Okay, you can set the prayers aside. Let's just do a short meditation before we begin. I think it's always nice. I realize it's Friday night and people might be tired from a full week of work or what have you, but at least a few quiet moments to still the mind somewhat, to let go of whatever distractions we might have. And then once we've done that for just a few minutes, then we'll set our motivation, our intention for engaging in these teachings. So I'm sure most of you have some technique that you use to meditate on the breath. If not, I encourage you to tune into that sensation in the area of the tip of the nose where you feel the air coming in and out of the nostrils. It's a subtle sensation that occurs in this area. And just tune into that as best as you can, trying to keep the mind very vivid and attentive there. But no doubt the mind might get distracted by sounds, might get distracted by thoughts that we have in terms of things that are on our minds currently, or something that happened this past week, or something we're planning for. When that happens, there's no judgment. We simply let that go when we see that that's occurred and return to the breath. So let's just do this in silence for a few minutes. I'll ring the chime to begin the meditation period. So now let's set our motivation. This topic, as I said earlier, Buddha nature, is a really important one to be able to be inspired by, to be able to know about. And essentially it feeds into our motivation greatly, because the concept of Buddha nature revolves around the idea that each and every single being, ourselves included, has the potential to develop our minds into the state of Buddhahood. Simply by having a mind, we have that potential. And whether or not we can achieve that potential certainly has to do with many other factors, as we'll be seeing. But just having that potential is amazing. Knowing about this is an incredible gift, because it helps us to have the confidence that each of us can develop our minds to that degree. So when we set our sights on this mind of bodhicitta, it has two aspirations. One that we frequently speak to first, which was even in the refuge verse, bodhicitta verse. May I become enlightened. May I become a Buddha. Well, if we understand Buddha nature very clearly, and if we come to appreciate what it means to have Buddha nature, well, then we have complete confidence that we ourselves can attain that goal. But moreover, the second aim, the second aspiration of bodhicitta that was in the last line of the refuge verse is in order to benefit all sentient beings. As Lama Zopa Rinpoche says, this is actually the main aim of bodhicitta. Becoming enlightened ourselves is the secondary aim, because it's only through our own enlightenment that we can then help others to become enlightened. But the main goal is to achieve the enlightenment of all beings, and having an awareness of Buddha nature in all beings, that every single being, just by virtue of having a mind, has the potential to develop that mind eventually into the state of Buddhahood. This gives us even greater confidence that this aim of bodhicitta is something that is absolutely sound, that is grounded in reality, that is based on Buddha nature. So whatever your own understanding of this idea of Buddha nature is at this point, just let that be the basis for your bodhicitta, holding those two thoughts, that you want to be of the greatest possible benefit to all beings, to help them to awaken their Buddha nature, to attain the state of enlightenment on the basis of that. And recognizing that in order to do that fully, you have to awaken your own Buddha nature. You have to be able to achieve the state of enlightenment yourself based on that. So just try to hold that awareness throughout this evening, as well as throughout tomorrow, throughout this entire course, and even beyond this course, for the rest of this life, and even beyond that. Because this is the most powerful motivation we can bring to all of our actions. Okay, good. So I've been working with the spiritual program team here at Tse Chen Ling, and I thought I'd go through very briefly this idea of the FPMT basic program that this text is a part of. This weekend is more like a primer. It's a taste of what this course is in the basic program, because we don't have time in the 3 sessions that we have tonight and 2 tomorrow to go through the entire text. But I'm hoping to touch on a good portion of the main subjects. So the basic program it's not basic in the terms of beginners, it's basic in the terms of fundamental for everyone who's in this tradition to study. Devised by Lama Zopa Rinpoche for Dharma students who wish to progress beyond introductory courses. So this is a bit more of an advanced study, to do more in-depth study and practice. It also offers a text-based introduction to the philosophical aspects of the Tibetan Buddhist Gelugpa tradition, again, that was founded by Lama Tsongkhapa. It's very traditional in that way. This is how I learned over in the master's program, was through root texts that were expounded upon on the basis of commentaries, and then my teacher, Geshe Jampa Gyatso, giving his oral commentary on all of that. Sometimes multiple commentaries that were written on these texts. So it's a similar type of thing for this. And we aren't distributing the commentary because it's huge by Gyaltsab Je, and it's very, very dense. And nonetheless, if you were to do the full course, we would try to go through that commentary, at least portions of it, if not all of it. The components of the basic program are fourfold, and the first 2 are the study component. Study component being 9 core curriculum subjects and 3 supplementary subjects. I'm not going to go into that whole list. The FPMT's website has the entire list. This is one of the core curriculum subjects. There are subject completion tests at the end of each of the individual subjects. It is important to have some sort of examination to see that you've gotten the heart of that. There's discussion, homework, reading assignments, meditation assignments. That's going to come in later in terms of other practice components. But nonetheless, we won't be doing all of that, obviously, for this weekend. These are all components that would be required if you were to do it as a fully qualified basic program. At the very end of the basic program, when one's at least done the 9 core subjects, you can do a 3-month final review. and that is required to take the final exam, because it involves going through all 9 subjects as well as the 3 supplementary, and being able to then be pretty well versed in them when you sit down for your final exam. Just know, I put it on another slide, but the final review can be done online now. Olga Plankin, who is our coordinator of the basic program, has informed me that it is now all online, so you don't have to go somewhere for 3 months at some center and study it in that way. You can actually do it as an online course. Ethical behavior component, I won't go into great depths on this, but one of the main things is that Lama Zopa Rinpoche felt that everyone who participated should, to the best of their ability, abide by the 5 lay vows, which are very core in Buddhist practice. Most of you know about them. Many of you have probably taken them. But they are essentially to not kill, to not steal, meaning to not take anything that is not offered, to not engage in inappropriate sexual behavior, which means primarily adultery or any coerced behavior, non-consensual behavior. The 4th one would be to not lie. That's the only one of speech. And then the 5th one is to not partake of alcohol and intoxicants. Obviously, many of you might not be ready to take all 5 of those as vows, but try to abide by that behavior in terms of, if you are taking this course for basic program, it's good to have that foundation of some level of practicing those. But certainly, I, as a teacher of basic program, I would encourage people, yes, not to come into the room with any intoxicants or, having just been at the bar or something. I mean, because it's not the proper way to study Dharma. But what you do outside of here, I wouldn't be as concerned about myself. But anyway, this is if you were taking this as a basic program course. So I'm talking about it as if you are, but nonetheless. Maybe some of you will when it does get started as a more formal program, which is the hopes of the spiritual program team here. The practice component, guided meditations, meditation assignments, practice days, short retreats. There are, for each of the courses, things that are probably recommended, but it's up to the instructor of each course to determine what is appropriate for that course. There is at the very end, or at some point in your study, certainly after you've done some Lam Rim or Stages of the Path study, one of the main texts in this basic program is Lama Tsongkhapa's middle-length Lam Rim, which is a very long text. But if you have a good foundation in Lam Rim, you are ideally to do a 3-month Lam Rim retreat. It can also be done, I believe, as 3 one-month retreats, because it's very hard for people to get away for 3 consecutive months. There is a service and training component, contributing to the administration of the basic program by guiding meditations, leading discussion groups, and other activities. So, it's not up to the instructor often to do all of that. It's up to the students to develop some skills around that. Because there is a benefit if you do graduate from the full basic program. If you complete all the components, all the requirements, you can apply to become a registered teacher of the basic program or of courses that are of a lower level than that, discovering Buddhism, what have you. So there's a lot of benefit that one can have for oneself as well as for others by doing this. So it's important to start acquiring some of those skills. Whether or not you do that, they are useful. So again, I won't go into these too much because this is, if you do an individual subject like this, there's an attendance requirement, participation. Hopefully there's audio recordings or video recordings that you can make up sessions if you do have to be away. There's a meditation requirement, a behavior requirement, as I mentioned, and then the completion test. For the entire program, there's the completion of all of these, the 9 core curriculum and the 3 supplementary subjects. Participation in the 3-month final review, which, as I said, is now either residential or online, and then finally passing the basic program final exam, as well as completion of a 3-month Lam Rim retreat or 3 one-month Lam Rim retreats. Okay, any questions on that? Because I just wanted to briefly say that because, again, try to plant some seeds. Those of you who might feel inspired to do that, there's a beautiful completion certificate that you get that Lama Zopa drew and designed. If that entices you, it's really quite nice. So, all right. So let's go on then to talk about, in the basic program, this course is usually called Tathagata Essence or Tathagata Essence. There's different ways of pronouncing this Sanskrit word, which is essentially referring to a Buddha. So Tathagata Essence is our Buddha essence, our Buddha potential. And in Sanskrit, and they use Sanskrit as in all the texts to kind of refer to that language in which all of these Mahayana sutras were originally set out. They were written in the Sanskrit language. And so out of respect to the Sanskrit language that these all come from, as well as to plant the seeds to have this kind of this connection to Sanskrit language. Sanskrit language is said to be the language of the Buddhas. So we want to kind of create that sort of energy behind this. We can look at the title in the Sanskrit. I'm not going to go through the whole meaning of this, but it's Mahayana-uttaratantra Shastra. It's got that word tantra in it, and you might think it has some sort of tantric component, but it is a sutra text. It is a sutra text that is essentially commenting on the tathagatagarbha sutra that the Buddha gave, which is a original discourse that the Buddha gave that Maitreya Buddha was expounding upon in terms of elaborating the concepts that were in that sutra. In Tibetan, it's Tekpa Chenpo Gyu Lame Tenche, and there's a system for knowing what the Tibetan letters are in Wylie. I won't go through that, but that's just what the name is in Wylie, so you could identify the individual Tibetan characters. In English, we simply call it the Mahayana Sublime Continuum. This word tantra is usually translated as continuum. And that's kind of the idea here, is that it's a continuum of this Buddha potential that we have had since beginningless time. Again, recalling that in Buddhism, we're working with this phenomenon that's called the mind. Mind is not our brains. It works in tandem with our brains and our central nervous system, all of our sensory capacities. But we've had mind since beginningless time. Mind has always arisen from previous moments of mind. There is no beginning to our mind. So there is a continuum of that mind that has gone from beginningless time, go through this life, all the way through to Buddhahood. That mind will never be destroyed by anything. It cannot be destroyed by anything. It can only be changed in terms of the quality of that mind. But this essential Buddha nature, this tathagatagarbha, this womb of the Buddha type of idea, this has been with us also since beginningless time, but most beings are ignorant of that. So this text is to help us to have some awareness, as I mentioned earlier, of Buddha nature in ourselves and all beings. The main text that is studied then is chapter 1 only of the Uttaratantra by Maitreya. We usually shorten it to Uttaratantra rather than the Mahayana-uttaratantra Shastra, etc., by Buddha Maitreya. And we're going to use a translation that's by Jeffrey Hopkins and Joe Wilson. Many of you know who Jeffrey Hopkins is. Joe Wilson also studied at University of Virginia, where Jeffrey Hopkins was a professor. It's a rather wordy translation of the original translated words from the Sanskrit. There's a lot of parenthetical information in it. And those come from the commentaries they were accessing while they were translating. A lot of times these original root verses are very terse, that you can't really get the meaning if you just had the words themselves. So we have that benefit, that we have these two amazing scholars who spent the time to insert in each of these verses some ideas that would help us to already formulate more meaning simply by reading the verses. The additional texts that you would use if you were going to do this as a full study are the commentary roughly to verses 23 to 168 of the first chapter. 168 is where it ends, but it starts with verse 1, obviously. The first three subjects are kind of skipped over because the main topic, again, is the Buddha nature, what's called sometimes this basic constituent, this basic component that has the ability to be transformed into the mind of a Buddha. The commentary, again, as I mentioned, is by Gyaltsab Dharma Rinchen, who is Gyaltsab Je, and translated by Gavin Kelty. So as I said, you won't have that in this terms of the material that you've been given, but there will be some quotes from that occasionally. I want to just talk a little about the origins of this text and the story of Maitreya and Asanga. Some of you may have heard this story before, and I'll read it from this wonderful little book that's on Buddha nature by Geshe Acharya Thupten Lodden. And it speaks to how this text was written, but then also, the wonderful story of Asanga's dedication to Maitreya that led for this text to be able to come into this world. So the teachings on Buddha potential, of course, originated from Shakyamuni Buddha in such sutras as the Tathagata Essence Sutra, again, Tathagatagarbha, and many others, he spoke of the essential nature of the mind of living beings and its relation to the potential for enlightenment. These teachings were widely expanded upon by Conqueror Maitreya in 3 of the 5 great treatises which he presented to the Indian Bodhisattva monk, a Sangha. Because it was a Sangha who promulgated these teachings of Maitreya on this earth, we will begin by examining some relevant parts of a Sangha's life story. 900 years after the passing of Shakyamuni Buddha, the great Bodhisattva Sangha was born in India. So it goes on and talks about his birth. So we're going to jump forward and go to the fact that he was, after all this amazing learning, he was trying to develop some great realizations, particularly around compassion. So Asanga proceeded to meditate continuously for 3 years in this cave that he was using. But he was not successful in gaining realizations or a vision of Maitreya, because this was his real hope, that by doing this he could have this appearance of this Buddha that he had a strong connection with, and his guru that would be able to help him. On the way, so discouraged, he left his retreat cave, and on the way down the mountain, he happened to notice some birds that were entering and leaving their nest. He saw that their wings brushed over rocks as they flew in and out, and that the constant brushing of feathers had actually smoothed down the rocks over a long period of time. He thought, well, if soft feathers can wear away rock by constant brushing, I can remove the obstacles to realization by constant energetic perseverance in my meditation practice. So he was quite inspired after seeing this, and he went back to the cave. And he enthusiastically practiced meditation for a further 3 years. So we're up to 6 years now. However, due to his karmic obstructions, he's still unable to gain realizations. He hadn't had a glimpse of Maitreya at all. He again decided to leave his retreat, but as he left the cave, he noticed a spring where drops of water had gradually worn away a large rock. Again, he thought that if tiny drops of water could wear down rock by constant dripping, then surely, if he kept working at his meditation, he could wear down his mind's stubborn resistance to gaining realizations. So once more he went into retreat. He meditates for another 3 years, but to no avail. Thoroughly discouraged by this time, he left the cave once more, but encountered a man who had filed down large pieces of iron. So he takes these huge pieces of iron and files them down in order to produce fine needles for his living, like, a sewing needle kind of thing. Thinking that if someone was prepared to take on such a laborious task just to earn a little money, then surely he could exert himself for the great goal of enlightenment. So he goes back to his cave once more, and you know what happens. He's there for another 3 years, and still nothing happens. So after a total of 12 years in the cave, Asanga had still not even had a dream of Maitreya, much less a vision. This time he decided to leave the cave for good. He's like, I'm done. That's 12 years, no Maitreya, no realization. On leaving the cave, Asanga came across a very sick dog, suffering from maggots eating its flesh. The dog was still alive, but crying pitifully from the pain. Asanga felt strong love arise for the mangy animal, and compassionately he wanted to remove its suffering. But Asanga could see that removing the insects, the maggots, would kill them, and so he cut off a piece of his own flesh for them to live on. He then realized that even pulling them off with his fingers would cause harm to them, so he decided to lick them off gently with his tongue. As he knelt down to put his tongue into the festering, maggot-ridden raw flesh of the poor dog, the animal suddenly appeared as Maitreya. So, he was like my teacher would always do, like with the closed eyes and going. Anyway, he had to close his eyes because I'm sure it was really gross. But anyway, the point is that it's at that point that he's like totally surprised, that Maitreya has finally appeared. And then he gets a little upset, like, where were you all these 12 years? He says, he said, I've been in the cave all these 12 years, and Maitreya pointed to where Asanga had unknowingly spat on his robe. If you're sitting in the meditation cave, I guess, you get a lot of stuff in your throat, and rather than, you just spit it out the cave. And so Maitreya was there the whole time, but he just had obscurations. He couldn't see Maitreya. So Asanga's heavy negative karma had prevented him from seeing him. However, the single act of powerful and genuine great compassion had purified all his negative karma and the obscuration of his delusions. This had brought Asanga instant high realizations, enabling him to perceive all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Sangha then requested Maitreya to take him to his Pure Land and give him the teachings that he needed. Maitreya agreed, and Sangha was able to spend part of a morning in the Pure Land, which was equivalent to 50 years of human time. When it was able to leave, Maitreya gave Sangha his 5 treatises as an offering both for him and the beings of the human realm. And one of these was this text. Again, whether you believe this story or not, it's inspiring to kind of recognize what goes into the creation of these things that we are studying, whether it was that involved or what have you. It's nonetheless something that people go to great lengths to be able to receive teachings, to keep them alive in this world. Sangha himself is known for having created the tradition of Buddhism that's called Chittamatra, which is the mind-only school. Whereas what we're going to be studying is the middle way school, the Madhyamaka school, which is said to have the more perfect view of reality that we'll be discussing. But nonetheless, we rely upon Sangha in many ways. He's written extensive commentaries on a lot of the great texts and is said to be one of the 2 great charioteers, those who kind of plowed their way into the 2 tracks of the Mahayana tradition, the Chittamatra and the Madhyamaka. So the significance and purpose of the study of this text, maybe I'll be laboring it by saying much more, but nonetheless it is really important for us to get a good grasp on what is meant by Buddha nature. So what we're going to be doing to do that is taking 3 parts, and these aren't going to exactly line up with the 3 sessions we have, because the second part has a lot to it. So I'm hoping to get into the second part if we can tonight. We'll see if we have some luck with that. And then that'll go into the morning session tomorrow, and then may even continue into the afternoon. But then there's what are called the 9 similes. I'm not planning to cover all 9 because it's just too voluminous. We'll cover 3 of the 9, hopefully. And there's some concluding advice that comes from this text. So, part 1, an introduction to the text, subject of Buddha nature. The text starts, of course, this is not part of the general study, chapter 1, but it makes homage to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. This is very common in many of these treatises like this, to pay homage to all the holy beings that have come before us, that we rely upon. And then I'm sharing just a little bit of the beginning because it introduces what are called the 7 Vajra topics or diamond topics of this text. We are studying the 4th one. But essentially, let's go ahead and read this verse together. I like reading verses together. It kind of gives a different energy to them. Buddha, doctrine, community, basic constituent, enlightenment, qualities, and finally, Buddha activities. The body of the entire treatise is, in brief, these 7 diamond topics. So these 7 Vajra or diamond topics, meaning they're kind of indestructible topics that have this great power and energy, are set out in the next slide. And they're also on a little chart that was sent to those with the materials, the chart that's called the Chart of the 7 Diamond Topics. I'm not going to go through a lot of these except to talk about kind of the categorization of these. We can see them as either being causes or results that we achieve. The first 3 are, of course, what we know of as the 3 jewels. Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, and it's called doctrine and community there, but we're essentially talking about those 3 and eventually how we want to achieve the result of being those for others, being the 3 jewels for others. So we rely upon them in terms of what we need as a cause to be able to come enlightened, but then we, in our resultant state, are able to do that for others, to become part of the force of the 3 jewels in the world that do help beings to become enlightened. It's kind of a cooperative condition. They have the Buddha nature, the basic constituent, which is the 4th point, but they need the ripening effects of the 3 jewels in their life. Nobody becomes enlightened on their own without relying upon Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. We have to have those forces in our lives. So the substantial cause that actually becomes the full enlightenment, the basis for one to achieve the desired goal of Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, the 3 jewels, is what we are calling here the basic constituent, but we're going to generally refer to it as Buddha nature. And this is the main subject of what we're looking at this weekend, and what is the main subject even when you study it as a more in-depth text. The 3 that are remaining are about the kind of taking it from that point of view of when we do rely upon those as a causal condition, it's because of these 3 factors, because there are beings who are enlightened, who will then guide us. That's the fifth topic. They have qualities which makes them suitable to be able to guide us, and they have Buddha activities. They are engaging in activities to enlighten all sentient beings. So these three factors kind of are cooperative causes that help us to achieve the three jewels in our own continuum, to become the three jewels for others, by using Buddha nature as the substantial cause for that. So this is just in brief. I'm not going to go into great detail at this point because we will get more into how Buddha nature is used in that regard. There are other things on your chart, but once more, if this was a full study, I would go into that, but I think it's better just to, you have it, you can look at it. Some people might be able to make sense of it without me going blah, blah, blah about it, but nonetheless, it's kind of an outline that shows you what is involved if you were to study the entire text. Chapter 1 is essentially, the first four topics. And so we are studying the latter part of chapter 1. As I said, it starts with verse 23, is when it starts moving in the direction of talking about Buddha nature. I think it's 27 that formally starts it. But nonetheless, we'll also be kind of neglecting the last three topics. So we're neglecting the first three, and we're neglecting the last three. And yet they're kind of implicit within this. Because we are going to be looking at Buddha nature and how we use an awareness of that, and that is a platform, a basis for us to be able to achieve the three jewels in our own continuum, and then to help others by being that force in their lives. Here's just a few quotes about why these are called that. From Khenchen Tranggu Rinpoche, he says it's called that because they are very profound, like a vajra. A vajra is this little implement that's used, but nonetheless it's used in Tantra a lot. But it's meant to be kind of this representative of something indestructible, this sort of indestructible nature of our Buddha, our Buddha nature, as well as of these Dharma teachings that we're looking at. Another teacher, Jamgon Kontrol Lodrotaye, who there's a book of his commentary on this, says the term vajra is used since a precious vajra is composed of indestructible material, and the subject to be expressed is difficult to penetrate by means of the discriminative wisdoms resulting from study and meditation. So that's kind of a warning, that this is a pretty heavy-duty text. I'm going to keep it as light as I can and as hopefully comprehensible as possible. But nonetheless, it's something that can be very difficult. So I looked at the chart. I don't need to do that. I don't want to necessarily, again, go into all the details of this, but I did talk about them in terms of cause and result. Again, the resultant state being the first three of the three jewels, the substantial cause being Buddha nature, and then the final three being a cooperative condition that we need enlightened beings in our lives to help us. So there's one more verse that kind of concludes this overview of the 7 topics. Let's read this together. From Buddha, the doctrine. From the doctrine, the community of superiors. From the community, the basic constituent of essential exalted wisdom is attained. Finally, from exalted wisdom is attained the supreme enlightenment, endowed with the qualities of the powers and so forth, and affecting the welfare of sentient beings. So this is the idea that, again, we could also look at them in this kind of linear process. So we talked about them as kind of having roles as causes and results, but we can see how there is a sort of causal chain that goes through from topic to topic. If you don't have a Buddha, you can't have the Dharma, because it's from the mind and the speech of a Buddha that the Dharma comes. From the Dharma, you then have people who practice it who start to gain realizations of the Dharma. This is the community of superiors. Is superior here, oftentimes the word is used Arya. Arya is a Sanskrit word that means those who have this superior wisdom. It means people who have realized the truth of emptiness, which we will touch on here and there because it's obviously a main component of all of this. Those superiors, the community of superiors, then kind of help people to recognize and see that basic constituent of exalted wisdom that they can formulate. Because once they begin to cultivate that wisdom, they begin to awaken their Buddha nature and move in that direction, especially if they're uniting it with the aim of full enlightenment, bodhicitta. And then finally, from that exalted wisdom that arises through the development of one's mind, the developmental Buddha nature, is attained supreme enlightenment. And eventually you are attaining that goal through your practice, which is endowed with the qualities, which was the sixth topic, and then engages in activities to help others. So we can also see it that way. It's kind of a nice way to kind of see what we're involved in. Okay, so again, I already went through this. Chapters 2, 3, 4 are the last three. Chapter 1 includes the first four, but we are not going to cover the first part. We'll mainly study selections from among those that first chapter. And tonight, as part of this introduction to Buddha nature, I do want to review some topics that will be helpful to get the most out of your study of this text. All right? Some of these may be a repetition for some of you in the room, but nonetheless, I felt like they were necessary. By the way, I have taught it in this abbreviated form twice before. I've taught the whole text once, and I have studied it a bit over in Italy. We didn't study this as one of our main texts over there, but it's definitely a part of the other text by Maitreya that we study, which is the Abhisamaya Lamkara. It's set out in there, and then we also did some study of some portions of this with Geshe Tenzin Temple, who was the second teacher over there. So what is Buddha nature? Buddha nature could be defined as that which has the ability to transform into a body of a Buddha. Now, body is a very loosely used term here. The Sanskrit word is kaya. It doesn't mean a physical body necessarily, as we'll see, because not everything that we can identify and kind of parse up a Buddha's experience, not everything is a body. There is a physical dimension to Buddhas, but that's only one dimension of them. By body, we mean kind of a portion of that parsing up a Buddha's experience. So Buddha nature, we will see at times being referred to as Tathagata essence, as Buddha potential, even sometimes as Buddha lineage, this idea that you have the lineage to be able to develop your mind into the state of a Buddha. Basic constituent, we saw that earlier. I mean, some of these may not be repeated so much, but I might even use some of these terms occasionally. But this is the essential identification of anything that is Buddha nature, is that which has the ability to transform into some aspect of a Buddha's dimension, a Buddha's being. The four bodies or kayas of a Buddha, and you do have a chart that is in your set of charts. It's some charts that came from when the basic program was taught over where I studied in Italy, but I wasn't there for the basic program. I was there for the master's program. It looks like this when it's printed in color. It's really quite nice. And it talks about kind of these four bodies and how they are related to lineage. So it's a useful tool to kind of bring all of this together. But essentially, sometimes they divide the bodies or the portions of that experience of a Buddha into two. And we see that there are two main categories there in terms of the truth body and the form body. Sometimes they divide it into four, which would be the two that are the subsets of the truth body and the two that are the subsets of the form body. Sometimes they unite the first two into one and then just have the other two down below. And so you hear of the three bodies of a Buddha. In the tantric presentation, this is frequently the case. But it doesn't mean that anything's left out when you do that. You're just talking about at different levels of this categorization. So when it is the three bodies, the truth body, the two that are below, are included in the concept of the truth body. They are both types of truth body. They're just differentiated slightly in terms of the meaning, well, actually greatly in terms of the meaning in regard to those two. So let's look at each of these briefly. I'm just going to talk about them very briefly because this isn't the main point of this text per se, but nonetheless, we can see that there is some advantage. So I'm going to be using the chart, which I realize can't be seen, but nonetheless, I'll go through each of these in terms of the truth body is on the right-hand side of your chart. And you can see that it has those two aspects, what we call the wisdom truth body and the nature truth body. I left truth out of there, but nonetheless, it could be inserted without any problem. What we mean by those two, and I won't pronounce the Sanskrit, I don't need to do that. I can, but I don't really need to. It's not that I can't. Well, truth body, it is good to remember this term Dharmakaya. We're going to see Dharmakaya a lot. Dharmakaya essentially in this context means truth body. Dharma being translated as truth. Dharma can be translated as a lot of different things. It can be translated as doctrine, as teachings. In this context, it's truth. It is essentially, if we talk about it at the level of the first one, just the truth body, it's essentially meaning the enlightened mind of a Buddha. Now, when we talk about the enlightened mind of a Buddha, we see that it has two components to it if we talk about its conventional nature and we talk about its ultimate nature. And this is going to be something that we're going to touch on here and there throughout this text, because our conventional mind, which is our awareness that is arising moment by moment, that is changing constantly, that is impermanent, that is always going through some process of various things happening, and that can develop into the mind of a Buddha, that impermanent phenomenon eventually becomes the wisdom truth body, the Jnana Dharmakaya. This is essentially the fully enlightened mind, the mind without any obscurations in it, that is completely omniscient, that is directed towards the welfare of all beings at all time. But it is pure mind. It doesn't have any physical form per se. In Tantra, they would say it has the subtle wind energies, but in terms of not having any gross form that we can relate to. The nature body, the Svabhavika Kaya, this is referring to the emptiness of that mind. The fact that that mind, even a Buddha's mind, lacks any true existence, any inherent existence, any existence from its own side. It's a dependent arising. It arises in dependence upon all the various factors and lacks even an atom of inherent existence. So we also have that emptiness. We call that our naturally abiding lineage or Buddha nature. It's essentially the emptiness of our own minds, not that we don't have any thoughts. I'm not talking that emptiness. It's the fact that our minds do not inherently exist. Our minds do not have any substantial existence. They're only nominally existent, merely designated on a base. All these kinds of concepts that you study when you study the Madhyamika philosophy, right? So emptiness is the greatest truth that we can realize. That's why, hence this is all about the truth body, about achieving the full culmination of knowing reality as it is, the truth of how things exist ultimately, which is their emptiness, but within that, the understanding of how things arise conventionally. Because things still do arise, albeit dependent upon all their causes and conditions, dependent upon their parts, and in the end, dependent upon that designation, that imputation. There's nothing that exists apart from some consciousness designating it as such. So all the phenomena that we deal with in the world, and even ourselves and our minds and our bodies and everything in the world, everything that can be posited as existing, exists in that way, conventionally being merely dependent upon imputation, and ultimately being empty of anything more than that. I mean, they kind of fit hand in hand when we understand those two ways of looking at it. Completely dependent, free of being independent. These are kind of the two realities of everything that exists. A Buddha is simply a being who has taken that mind and completely purified it, so the conventional mind is absolutely different. It has still the nature, in a conventional way, of what we call the clear light nature of mind, but nonetheless, it is completely clarified, completely purified, unlike my mind that is, still together with delusion, still together with the afflictions, with everything that pollutes the mind, that obscures the mind. But the nature body, and this is one of the main points that we're going to see as we go through this text, the emptiness of a Buddha's mind is the same emptiness as the emptiness of our minds, because the emptiness of all things is of one taste. It is the lack of inherent existence of microphone, the lack of inherent existence of television, the lack of inherent existence of person. It is a negation on the basis of whatever phenomena exist. So this is actually kind of giving, again, these two tracks, if you will, that are about what we mean by Buddha nature. And let me actually go to that next slide to show you that, because I'll come back and talk about the form bodies. We have these two divisions of Buddha lineage, what we call our naturally abiding lineage, which is the emptiness of our minds, which is what allows everything to arise. It's not, without emptiness, things couldn't come into existence. And then we have the developmental lineage, which means that our minds, because of the ability to change them, to be affected by enlightened beings, to change it through meditation and all the steps on the path, can actually transform and develop into the mind of a Buddha. In other words, these two ripen into the nature body of a Buddha in terms of our own emptiness becoming the emptiness of a Buddha's mind, or emptiness of our own mind becoming the emptiness of a Buddha's mind, and then our developmental lineage tracking into the wisdom mind of a Buddha. But also, of course, the manifestations of that wisdom mind, which are the form bodies. So let's go back and just look at those briefly. The form bodies, or the rupakaya, are referring to physical form, because this is how Buddhas have to be able to interact with sentient beings. Buddhas in their glorified wisdom, truth body, mind, sentient beings can't relate to that. How can we possibly access? We can't even access other people's minds, unenlightened beings' minds. There are clairvoyances that you can develop where you can access some of that, but nonetheless, to be able to get to the mind of a Buddha, you'd have to be a Buddha yourself. So in order for sentient beings, unenlightened beings, to be able to relate to a Buddha, they have to take physical form. I know this sounds, for some people who might be new to these concepts, it sounds a little woo-woo, a little like, oh, you're talking about, some paranormal phenomena. It's not what most people accept in some regard in terms of the physical world that they can see and measure and look at and what have you. But this is what comes when we develop our minds. When we develop our minds a bit, we get some greater powers. When we develop it even more, we get even greater powers. We develop it to the state of Buddhahood. You have the most powerful mind that there is, which can manifest in whatever form is needed for sentient beings. The two that are on the list here of the form body are kind of encompassing two different experiences of sentient beings with regard to those Buddhas. The complete enjoyment body, or the Sambhogakaya, the first of these that's listed, this is referring to a very purified form of the Buddha that is appearing in a pure land, that is teaching the Mahayana Dharma only to Arya Bodhisattvas, superior Bodhisattvas, those who have had that direct realization of emptiness. It's kind of like really advanced Dharma that they're getting in these pure lands that they can access through the force of their realizations. So this is kind of a more static form of the Buddha in a sense, or of these holy beings, that the ability to kind of manifest in a pure land where various and highly advanced beings can have access to them. But the way that most of us relate to Buddhas is the last one, the emanation body, the Nirmanakaya. This is the way that sentient beings are most greatly affected by the enlightened activities of the Buddhas, is when they appear in forms that we can relate to, that emanate from the enlightened mind of a Buddha and appear in our world due to our karma, the combination of our karma and the power of the Buddhas. We are able to then interact with those beings or other phenomena. They say a Buddha can appear as a bridge or a car or whatever is needed. Obviously, the most important way that Buddhas kind of take form in this world is when they teach the Dharma, when they are actually the beings who start the Dharma wheel turning, which is what Buddha Shakyamuni did. He was said to be a supreme emanation body, because those who start the wheel turning in a particular world system have that superiority. But nonetheless, Buddha Shakyamuni can still be appearing in this world as your next door neighbor, or as a rock or as a car or whatever. All these various phenomena. It doesn't mean that we should stop trusting our appearances completely, but nonetheless, we don't know for sure who is and who isn't a Buddha. You all could be Buddhas for all I know. I have no idea. I know you say you're not, but you really are. No. So it doesn't mean that, again, we shouldn't trust, or we shouldn't rely upon our what appears to us in an ordinary way, but just know that there can be that aspect. And especially, this is why in this tradition, it's just a little footnote, we tend to look at a lot of our spiritual guides, especially highly advanced spiritual guides, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, whoever it is that you feel is one of these very greatly superior guides that we have in our lives, as being Buddhas. Because if there are Buddhas manifesting in this world, if there are emanation bodies, well, then where are they going to appear? I don't think they're running for president this time. I would, maybe, I don't know. I can't tell. But, this is just what we, would tend to see, is that the most important way that Buddhas are manifesting in this world is to guide other sentient beings. And those are emanation bodies. They are part of the enlightened mind of a Buddha that through their power, they take form. And, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, they've got records. He was, born to this family and grew up as a little baby. They have pictures of him as a cute little guy, what have you. And he went to the monasteries and studied and all of the stuff that followed. And he seems to get ill and he seems to, have problems and difficulties and all of this. But that's all an appearance. That's our karma. And we are blessed to have the Buddhas appearing in this amazing form to help us. Anyway, this is just, again, a little footnote on that, but the emanation body is the main way in which we and others are benefited. So let's look at where these come from in terms of these two lineages, and it is on your chart as well. But these definitions are really important in terms of understanding what these two tracks of Buddha nature or Buddha lineage are. Naturally abiding lineage is the reality or suchness, meaning the emptiness of a defiled mind, a mind with pollution, with obscurations, which are, my mind, whoever in the room can say, that's my mind. Then it's the mind of a sentient being that is contaminated with the obscurations. It's the reality, the emptiness of that mind that is together still with some pollution. And it is that which is suitable to be transformed into what we would call an uncompounded body of a Buddha, meaning a permanent, unchanging body of a Buddha. Because that is unchanging. The emptiness of the mind never changes. The mind is changing constantly because it's impermanent, but the emptiness of that is static. It doesn't change at all. So the emptiness of a Buddha's mind and the emptiness of your mind, remember I talked earlier, are the same. It's the same continuity, continuum, tantra of our emptiness of our mind that has been there since beginningless time. It's still the same emptiness. It continues carrying forward. The basis for that emptiness is different because that mind could be the mind of a dog or the mind of a hungry ghost or the mind of a human as it is now, for all of us in the room. So the mind itself can change, but a mind with defilements, its emptiness, its lack of inherent existence, the fact that it doesn't exist from its own side, which this isn't a whole course on emptiness. I did that last weekend down at Vajrapani. But, I will touch on it here and there, but I just can't spend the whole weekend talking about emptiness because it really takes us off track. But the idea is this is once more the most profound truth about things is that they lack inherent existence. They have that emptiness or suchness. The naturally abiding lineage continues all the way through Buddhahood and is that emptiness of the mind that is contaminated. It becomes the nature truth body when it's free of all contaminations. So that's why on your chart, as you'll see, that essentially it's the only permanent part of it is the nature truth body, and it is the naturally abiding lineage. Everything else is developmental lineage or comes from developmental lineage. Let's look at the definition for that. This refers to the potentiality that exists in the mind of a sentient being. That, by way of the imprints left on the mind, through the force of hearing, reflecting, and concentration, these sound familiar to anyone? These are the three ways that wisdom arises in our minds, through hearing the Dharma, reflecting upon it, and then concentrating on it through deep meditation to gain realizations. Through the imprints left on the mind by that process, it can be progressively developed into the final attainment of Buddhahood. It is that which is suitable to be transformed into a compounded body of a Buddha. An example is a form body, but obviously it also includes the wisdom truth body, the mind of the Buddha. So your own mind, which right now is together with contaminations, is kind of with its emptiness. The emptiness goes forward and becomes the nature truth body. The developmental lineage that you have continues along this track and eventually becomes the wisdom truth body, and by virtue of that, all the form bodies, because the form bodies are an extension of the wisdom truth body. They are how that mind manifests in the world, together with matter, that is manipulated to be able to be, used in that way for beings Buddhas to emanate, for sentient beings. So this is the importance of kind of understanding that Buddha nature is a very relevant topic because it shows how we can actually achieve this process, because we have all the raw stuff from which it's formed. The difference between these four bodies of a Buddha and where we're at right now is simply a matter of where you're at on the continuum. We just have to get from where we're at on the continuum now to the part of the continuum that's over here, that is the same mind simply purified, simply having everything removed, and the emptiness of the mind that has been constant throughout this whole process, which is the very factor that allows your mind to develop into the state of a Buddha. They say that if everything existed inherently, you'd never be able to change your mind. You'd never be able to become a Buddha, because inherent existence means unchanging, kind of set objective existence, existing from its own side, independently out there on its own. If our minds existed that way, they couldn't change from moment to moment. There would be no possibility. Master Nagarjuna says, for those for whom emptiness is possible, everything is possible. For those for whom emptiness is not possible, nothing is possible. So it just speaks to the fact that, emptiness is there, whether you believe in it or not, or whether you have some conviction that it's possible or not. But the reality is that it's only by acknowledging the truth of emptiness that one can come to see how conventional reality is upheld. It's the way that these two truths are brought together most completely. To understand that from one side we can say things exist conventionally, just like our minds that are here together with our continuum right now. From another point, though, they don't exist inherently at all. They exist, but they don't exist inherently. They lack all of that. These two are completely complementary. It's the only way to put the whole picture together. So if for you emptiness seems impossible, it's possible, because nothing can arise without emptiness. Emptiness has always existed. It's just we have to know it. We have to realize it. All right, maybe that's enough on that. This is another little tricky thing that I do want to talk about, because I think it is important, and it's kind of weird because we can say that we can divide stains or contaminations into two, but we'd have to call these a nominal division because the first one actually doesn't exist. These are what we might call, if they did exist, natural stains. Stains that do not contaminate the minds of all sentient beings. In other words, no such natural stains exist. This would be the stain of inherent existence. I guess it's a little tricky in the words. Okay, so if your mind inherently existed, it would have a natural stain of inherent existence. But because your mind doesn't inherently exist, you don't have any natural stains. But nonetheless, we're going to talk about it as the fact that it is a natural stain that we're naturally free of. We are free of existing inherently. You kind of getting it? It's sort of like you're talking about it as a negative quality that we think exists on the mind, but it doesn't exist at all. We're not naturally under the sway of the mind being inherently existent. Instead, we are already free of that. We've always been free of that. But yet we believe in it. Yet we think it's true. That's the problem. Our ignorance holds on to that. But nonetheless, we're naturally free of that. We've never had any inherent existence, any moment in time, throughout our countless lifetimes. Adventitious stains are what we have to really be worried about, though, because those are all the things that we planted in our own minds through the force of our ignorance that thinks that the natural stain exists. Because we believe in inherent existence, we have polluted our own minds. The adventitious stains contaminate the mind of a sentient being. Although these have obscured the natural purity of the mind since beginningless time, they absolutely can be removed. This is the good news that the Buddha sends to all of you, wherever you are, is that all of what pollutes your mind is only there adventitiously. This word adventitious, we don't use it in everyday language, right? It means that there's causes and conditions that by which it arises, and when those causes and conditions are gone, it won't arise. It's kind of, there only for the fact that we haven't gotten rid of the causes for it to be there. And the causes we've created. It's not like somebody has made you with this and somehow planted it in your mind and now you have to deal with it. You're creating it all the time by your adherence to the stain of inherent existence that you think is there. The natural stain, which actually doesn't exist. This is really what we mean by emptiness, is the non-existence of the natural stain, the non-existence of inherent existence. Again, I'm maybe confusing people with using so much language, but nonetheless, this is kind of the main topic we're trying to get at here, is just to have an understanding that from beginningless time, the mind has never been inherently existent. We believe contrary to that, therefore, we have polluted our own minds through that ignorance. mean, I don't know, sometimes I use this example when I talk about emptiness of like a child who believes that there's a boogeyman in the room or something, some monster in the room. Well, if that child lived its life with never being disproved that that was there, I mean, it'd be like neurotic, always never being able to sleep, never being able to rest their minds because they think that there's a monster that exists. But the monster never exists. That's the natural stain that isn't even there. But the child is believing in that monster every night before going to bed, is just terrified that it's going to come out from underneath the bed or out of the closet or wherever. So they're living their life with all of this exaggerated stuff, polluting their own minds with their own fear and whatever. And it's totally unnecessary because the monster never existed. So what's going on for us is we have believed in this natural stain of inherent existence since beginningless lifetimes. And it has caused us to have false ideas about how things exist, how we exist, just like the child's believing in those monsters. So someone has to show us that the monster doesn't exist. This is what the Buddhas are doing essentially for us, is letting us know that that has never been there from the beginning. We've never had any inherent existence at all. The person hasn't, the mind hasn't, all the objects in the world haven't. They appear that way, they appear to exist out here on their own, but they, in the end, are lacking that entirely. So these adventitious stains can be removed. This is, again, the good news that we have from this, and that's because the natural stains don't exist. Inherent existence doesn't exist. In regard to objects of negation on the path, we can also speak of two, therefore. Objects of negation that do not exist, which refers to the natural stains of inherent existence. So we have to negate those because we're believing in them so strongly, but they don't even exist. It's like the child believing in the monster that isn't there in the room. It's a figment of their imagination. We have created this through the force of our own ignorance. It's negated by logic and reasoning. With the child, it's a logical process, right? You before the child goes to bed, you bring the flashlight in and you turn on all the lights in the room and you show underneath the bed. The child looks under the bed and sees there's no monster there. And go into the closet, there's no monster in any corner of the closet. You go wherever there might be a monster. And you show the child that the monster doesn't exist. And eventually, through the force of that reasoning and logic, the idea of the monster in the room gets negated. It's the same in Buddhism. It's a very logical process through reasoning to come to understand that the self that we are believing in particular, this sense of I that we hold to so dearly, that we think is here in this real, inherently existent, objectively existent way, isn't here at all. There still is an I, very, very subtle in the way it exists. And again, I mentioned earlier, it's merely imputed, merely designated to this collection of stuff. But nonetheless, what we've been believing in is so much more substantial than that. So if we are able to negate all of that and come to understand that that all doesn't exist, that's one object of negation, is to say this thing that we thought existed doesn't exist at all. That's one object of negation. Now, the objects of negation that do exist, that refers to the adventitious stains of the conception of inherent existence and the obscurations that arise from that. Those do exist. That's the pollutions in our own mind. That's the stuff that we have to get rid of. If it didn't exist, we wouldn't have any problems, right? But that does exist, and that has to be negated through the path, but through the path awarenesses that we develop through our reasoning and logic. Our reasoning and logic helps us to defeat the idea of the natural stain existing, and by virtue of that, we come to practice the path that leads to the removal of all the false conceptions that believed in that. Everybody getting kind of these two, how they're differentiated? One is a false idea that the mind is holding to, false concept. The other is the mind itself that gets polluted by that ignorance. Okay? Or the ignorance that is in the mind. It's not really the mind itself. The mind is naturally pure, but these are all the conceptions that are formed in our minds. But the objects of those conceptions, the thoughts that those conceptions are having about things existing inherently, those don't exist at all. It's the child believing the monster is there. Is everybody still with me? I mean, not getting some nodding heads occasionally, which is great. But nonetheless, I don't want people to think, this is... there are going to be complicated topics along these lines going forward, but nonetheless, this is probably the trickier stuff, just to get our heads around, kind of get in the ballpark of talking about Buddha nature. All right. Maybe I don't need to go through this first. Let's read it anyway. The basic constituent that is the object to be realized, the enlightenment that realizes it, the Buddha qualities that are branches of this, and the Buddha activities that are for the sake of causing realization. Of these, respectively, the first topic, the basic constituent, is the cause of purification. The other three are conditions of purification. This is a bit of what I said about this chart, right? You know, in terms of how it's set out. Whoops, wrong chart. This chart. The one that's a separate page on the PDF file that you got. We talked about that. That's the furthest to the left here, this column, the very first column, where we talk about the main cause of your enlightenment is your Buddha nature. Now, cause is nominally used for the naturally abiding lineage, right? Because it's emptiness. Emptiness is not a cause. Emptiness is uncaused. Emptiness is an unchanging phenomenon. It doesn't have a cause because it is a negation of inherent existence on the basis of our minds, which is the developmental lineage. It has causes. It's impermanent. It's changing all the time. But nonetheless, both of them we're going to call a cause because it's through the force of our developing our mind that the naturally abiding lineage is seen for what it is, that the emptiness of the mind is known in that way. So that's the main cause, as Maitreya is saying in this kind of third line. The first topic, the basic constituent, is the cause of purification. The other three are conditions of purification. As I said, you need enlightened beings who have attained enlightenment. That's the fifth topic. You need them to have the qualities that they possess, which by virtue of becoming enlightened they have. And then they need to engage in the Buddha activities, which by virtue of attaining that state they will do. Buddhas don't like attain the state and then go on vacation and don't help sentient beings. Their whole purpose of becoming enlightened is to help sentient beings. So that's just, again, another way of looking at this. So the main cause of a Buddha's exalted wisdom is one's own basic constituent. Suchness with defilement is the phenomenon to be perceived. It is the focus of the meditative equipoise of a bodhisattva, and thus is the main cause of the exalted wisdom of a Buddha. I just said this right. I mean, wisdom, the emptiness of our own minds, which is the same emptiness of all phenomena, they're all the same taste again, that is the object we need to realize with our minds. So in that way, we can say that that naturally abiding lineage together with our developmental lineage are the causes that will allow us to attain that state. As I said before, this suchness is not an actual cause because it is permanent, it is unchanging. The enlightenment of others, the ultimate direct perception of suchness, as well as the qualities of the Buddhas that are branches of that enlightenment, as well as the deeds arising from those qualities, both of which lead sentient beings to perceive suchness. So from the place of enlightenment, through their qualities that manifest, their deeds that come from those qualities, those allow us to eventually realize emptiness ourselves. Those are the three conditions for removing the defilements. Let's read one more verse that is kind of the setup for all this. Because a perfect Buddha's body is pervasive, because suchness is without differentiation, and because a Buddha lineage exists, all embodied are always in possession of a Buddha essence, a Buddha nature. So, three conditions that are being set out here. The first is that Buddha's activities pervade all realms. It's not like the Buddhas say, "Oh, we're only going to go to the United States this year," you know, or we're only going to go to some other country this year, or whatever. The Buddha's activities are always pervading everywhere. So, kind of getting a proof to why we all have the ability to attain enlightenment, why we all have Buddha nature. One, because the enlightened deeds of the Dharmakaya of a perfect Buddha, the truth body of a Buddha, emanate to all sentient beings. Therefore, all sentient beings are capable of engaging with the enlightened deeds of Tathagatas, and therefore having that condition. Remember, that was one of the conditions. You have to kind of be in touch with enlightened beings, their qualities and their activities. Well, the deeds of the Buddhas are pervading everywhere. There's no realm of existence, no sentient beings who are not in the scope of a Buddha's compassion and how they are directing the energies of their mind, their enlightened activities. Secondly, this is what I was pointing out earlier. Just you're going to hear repetition of many points through this weekend, and it's just looking at it from slightly different angles. This is how we're proving that you have the ability to become a Buddha. Because suchness, by its nature, is undifferentiated in both the Buddhas, the Tathagatas, and sentient beings. Remember, the emptiness of a Buddha's mind is the same emptiness of your mind, the same emptiness of all phenomena, all one taste and emptiness. Nonetheless, diversity of phenomena conventionally, we can't say my mind is the same as a Buddha's mind. The emptiness of my mind, absolutely the same as the emptiness of a Buddha's mind. So therefore, suchness with defilement exists in all sentient beings. As long as we are sentient beings with defilements in our minds, we still have emptiness. We're never without that emptiness. As I said, throughout beginningless time, we've never had a moment when we didn't have the emptiness of our minds. All right. The third reason, all beings are endowed with the natural lineage that is capable of transformation into the Dharmakaya, and all sentient beings are endowed with the lineage arising from proper appropriation. This was the translation that Gavin Kilty had for developmental lineage. It's a very strange term, but it's his choice. This is what we deal with when we deal with translations of texts from Tibetan into English, is that there are different translation equivalents. So what's being said here is that the naturally abiding lineage is capable of transforming into kind of the nature truth body, that aspect of the Dharmakaya, and we are all endowed with the developmental lineage, which is capable of transforming into the enlightened form body, as well as, again, the wisdom body. We're not denying that that's also a compounded or impermanent part of our experience as a Buddha. But nonetheless, it's most important to understand that that is what allows us to eventually be a benefit to others. Once more, the main goal of enlightenment isn't, your abiding in that state. It's being able to benefit others. And as I said, you can't from that place of your Dharmakaya wisdom, you can't benefit others without taking form. So it's frequently set out in this way of seeing that the primary thing that we're trying to develop in terms of our developmental lineage is the capacity to be with sentient beings from that enlightened wisdom, to be able to share the Dharma with them and so on, help them on their path. So all beings have this. And this is what this text is really kind of showing to us, is kind of the various ways of looking at Buddha nature so that we can come to understand that this is a fact for everyone. This is a fact for every sentient being. Now, whether an ant, crawling on the ground, doing its little ant activities during the day, whether it can become enlightened in that state is dubious, right? I mean, because an ant doesn't have the potential to be here in the room, at least that I know of, and hear Dharma teachings, and use them. I mean, it might hear some vibrations in its little ant ears, whatever it has. I don't know what ants have. But it's not going to be able to sit down in meditation and go, oh, now I need to meditate on the emptiness of my mind. Even dogs can't do that, right? And we associate with dogs much more frequently than ants, I think. All these beings that have an existence that doesn't allow them to have access to the teachings due to the obscurations they have karmically in those forms will not be able to become enlightened in that state. But we humans in the room, we do have that. We have the ability to use this human life. And it's said through the tantric teachings, the more esoteric teachings of the Buddha, that we can become enlightened in one brief lifetime, even one small portion of a brief lifetime. So it's important that we recognize the value that we have in this human life, but nonetheless, every being has a Buddha nature. That little mind that's together with an ant body crawling on the ground will eventually become the mind of a Buddha through a lot of different rebirths and being able to access the Dharma as in the way that we are and develop their minds and so on. All right, that's the introduction. Did I blow everybody away yet or anything? You're all still hanging in there? Let's take a little stretch break. We have it about a little over a half hour, but I'm worried that people are going to fall asleep a bit if you don't stand up and stretch. So I'm giving you like a 2-minute permission to do yoga or whatever you want to do in 2 minutes, something to kind of wake up a little bit, all right? I mean, maybe at this point it might be useful for me just to spend a minute not going to be a minute, it's going to be a few minutes, going over how His Holiness talks about why it's possible to remove these afflictions from our mind. We've already seen a little bit of it because essentially the foundational reason is because everything that is an affliction is rooted in ignorance, and that ignorance isn't in accord with reality. It's believing in the inherent existence of our mind, the inherent existence of all phenomena. But essentially, in a book that's called The Dalai Lama at Harvard, there's a really nice discussion of this where he goes into why it's possible to have a cessation of that ignorance and of everything built on that ignorance, and therefore a cessation of our suffering. And he has about eight steps in this. He says, first, the afflictions are not inseparable from mind, which is a double negative, right? Meaning they are separable from the mind. But we tend to think that they are inseparable from our minds. That if I've got anger in my mind, well, then anger is going to never be parted from my mind. It's going to continue to be some factor within my mind. How do we know that? Because they are not in the nature of the mind. They only arise occasionally. This is, once more, the first topic we're going to look at in regard to the 10 presentation is understanding this clear light nature of the mind. I often use the example of a glass of water, which I very, luckily have here tonight that I can use as a prop. And I didn't even ask for a glass of water that would be a prop, but someone got me a glass of water. I think Mary Ellen got me a glass of water. Thank you, Mary Ellen. So this glass of water is like the nature of our minds, right? It's clear. It's not polluted in any way, hopefully. Maybe it's got like LSD in it or something. I'm in San Francisco, right? All right. So if I go out to the garden out there or something, somebody's yard, and I take a couple of spoonfuls of dirt and I shovel it into this water and I mix it all up, well, then the clarity of the water isn't apparent, right? It's polluted at that time. It's opaque. We don't have the ability to see the clarity of the water. But is the clarity really gone? It's just not manifest because the water, its nature is clarity. Water isn't naturally polluted, right? It takes, corporations to do that. So anyway, the idea is that all of this is adventitious again. It's there through causes and conditions. The afflictions are not inseparable from the mind because they are not in the nature of the mind. Yes, they're mentally formed. We're not denying that my anger is mentally formed. We're denying that it is not in the nature, that it's in the nature of my mind. We have to deny that reality, that the fundamental nature of the mind is clarity. This is what we're going to be looking at in the first major topic, which is the 10 presentations on Buddha nature, is establishing that clear light nature of the mind. Second, positive and negative states cannot coexist. Can you have a mind of hatred and love at the same time? These are, a negative state of mind of hatred is wanting someone to suffer, wanting to inflict pain on them, however you translate hatred as. Love is wanting them to be happy. How can you want those both at the same moment? They can't coexist. That's another reason that feeds into this. Number 3, positive states of mind have the support of valid cognition and therefore can exist without ignorance. Right now, our positive states of mind are still with ignorance to a large degree, simply because we've been polluted by ignorance since beginning of time. That dirt has been in the water, and we have never gotten rid of it. So even our positive thoughts come together with some of that dirt. We think that we inherently exist and the person inherently exists even when we're practicing acts of kindness and generosity. So, but if you remove that ignorance, you can still have the positive act being supported by valid cognition. Because that is simply me observing someone who has a need for resources, and through the power of my having those and wishing to share them, I'm giving them to that other person. There's no distortion going on there, right? A mind of generosity, a mind of love, a mind of compassion doesn't need ignorance to be upheld. The next point, though, negative states of mind don't have a valid support and cannot exist without ignorance. This is the whole point, is that when we are adhering to ignorance, we can have positive states of mind, but our negative states of mind absolutely depend upon that. In other words, for me to get angry at somebody or have hatred towards somebody, I have to be together with that ignorance that thinks that they inherently exist and I inherently exist and the whole thing inherently exists. And then on the basis of that, I lash out at them and do things that are harmful to them. But without that ignorance, you can't have a mind like that, because everything else is based on that clinging to this real I that is being offended at that time, and that real person that is doing the offending, and everything else that is involved. So His Holiness is pointing out that essentially you have two different states of mind that can be, through our reasoning, come to be seen as valid, positive states of mind, or as invalid, negative states of mind. And if we look at, even on a conventional level, the mind of hatred or anger towards a person isn't really grounded in conventional truth either, because it's looking at that person through the lens of them being inherently evil and completely bad, and there's no good that we see in the mind of anger in them at all, right? The mind of anger is seeing only the negative qualities, exaggerating those, making it into something that is totally fabricated. I mean, there may be some negative qualities there. I'm not denying that, because we all have a mix of negative and positive, but the mind of anger is blind to a good portion of the reality of that person. It isn't seeing them through a proper lens. The mind of compassion, though, looking at that person and seeing them in that state, would be completely valid, because it sees them as a being who's under the control of their own delusions and wants them to be free of that, wants them to not suffer. But the mind of hatred wants them to suffer and wants to retaliate against them on the basis of the same fact that they are under the control of their delusions, but not seeing it that way. It's not in line with conventional reality either. But nonetheless, the deepest error that we're making of thinking things inherently exist is the support for all our negative actions. It is the support for positive, but positive don't need it. They will survive just fine in a state of wisdom. In fact, they'll be even more powerful with wisdom, because that wisdom will help one to, be much more effective in helping others. The fifth one, that supporting ignorance is erroneous. It apprehends inherent existence. It can be refuted. Again, this is something I just have alluded to, but that's where His Holiness goes with that, is that the negative have to be grounded in ignorance. That ignorance can be refuted. It's erroneous. The wisdom refuting inherent existence, this is the sixth one, directly opposes ignorance. It's not like missing the target. It and ignorance are total opposites. The wisdom is ignorance that believes in inherent existence. These two cannot coexist. They are polar opposites. Therefore, step 7, wisdom can harm ignorance. Ignorance can be weakened and eventually eliminated by familiarity with wisdom, and all that is supported on ignorance eventually ceases as well. So once we get rid of ignorance, everything that is supported on ignorance is gone. Even when we begin just the process of weakening it, we already have a lessening of the tendency for those states of mind to arise. If our meditation on emptiness is really effective, if our wisdom realizing emptiness is quite effective. The 8th point, the final point, is that all the positive qualities, such as wisdom, compassion, and so on, can be developed limitlessly. This is why we can attain Buddhahood, is because we're not talking about just some, we have this amount of ignorance, so we generate this amount of wisdom and then it's done. You can generate your wisdom to limitless degrees, infinite degrees, your compassion to infinite degrees. Why? Because, 1, the basis of the mind is stable and continuous. Once more, this tantra element, this continuity, it's stable and continuous. Unlike the body, right? The body isn't a continuous basis. We lose it at some point, and then we have to get a new body, and we have to develop that body if we want to use it for anything. There's nothing that we can do physically to a limitless degree, because this body is quite limited and not something we can take forward and continue to develop from life to life. The mind also, secondly, can become habituated to good qualities. The mind is what we make it. The mind is like putty in your hands. If you want to make the mind into something really horrible and despicable and awful in the world, you can do that. People do that, right? If you want to make the mind into something that is totally loving and embracing of all, sentient beings and, totally dedicated to their welfare, you can do that. The mind can become habituated to good qualities. Master Shantideva says there is nothing whatsoever that doesn't become easier through the force of familiarity. We've gotten really good at the familiarity with these negative states of mind, but that doesn't mean, again, that we can, rely upon them in any way. We can equally become familiar with these positive states of mind, and moreover, they will advance limitlessly through our continued familiarity on the basis of a mind that continues on. Thirdly, in regard to why they are, able to be developed limitlessly, good qualities are enhanced and not diminished by reasoning and wisdom. I mentioned this earlier, right? they're totally supported and enhanced even by wisdom. This is why, bodhisattvas, these beings who are intent upon achieving enlightenment, become more and more capable of benefiting others as they develop their mind more and more, right? As they continue to get greater and greater qualities, as we talked about on Wednesday night here, right, with the question about, do these Buddha qualities kind of advance as you continue further? It was the quality, the generosity when I was talking about they eventually can give their bodies even to other beings, all of this. So I like those reasons because they really kind of spell out, what we're talking about here in terms of the importance of looking at Buddha nature is to understand the platform by which these reasons make complete sense. Because this wisdom that we're trying to develop, can be supported through this whole process. Yes, Kim?
Can you mention the name of the book?
Again, it's the Dalai Lama at Harvard. Yeah, the book, the question was, can I mention the name of the book? And I'm sorry, I'll try to repeat the questions, or Urs has a microphone. We'll make sure, because we do have people who will be listening to this at a later point or listening live. So, any questions on that idea? Okay, now we're ready to kind of roll up our sleeves and get into the main part of the text. There are these 10 presentations on Buddha nature, which is a good chunk of the first part of this section on the basic constituent. As I said earlier, there are two main approaches to understanding Buddha nature or lineage in this text. One is the 10 presentations that we're going to go into now. The other is the 9 similes, ways that we can use various examples to show an aspect of Buddha nature that it's kind of there and can be revealed to beings, but we're currently obscured to that reality. So the two essential reasons why we need these two presentations, I mentioned this earlier in regard to the 10 presentations, they establish the clear light nature of the mind. Now it doesn't mean that we're not going to hear about the stains being adventitious, which is what the second, the 9 similes do. But the main point of the first one of the 10 presentations is to help drive that home that the mind doesn't have, as its basis, it is clear light. At its basis, it is pure, meaning primarily it's emptiness. It's emptiness. It doesn't have that natural stain at all. We've always had a mind that is empty of inherent existence, in spite of our deep belief in that. In spite of our thinking that we and all phenomena inherently exist, we can come to know that everything is empty. And we're here focusing mostly on the mind, again, because we're talking about the emptiness of the mind, which is our naturally abiding lineage, and our mind itself, which is the developmental lineage. But nonetheless, Geshe Lodin in his text points out that this first point is still going to be primarily pointed at the clear light nature of the mind, which is its conventional nature. Its emptiness and its clear light nature kind of go hand in hand, and they've always been there. Just like the glass of water has been fundamentally pure from the very beginning in terms of that water, but is currently obscured by all the dirt, all the pollution that we put in it. It's the same with our minds. The other topic that we'll get into towards the end of tomorrow is the 9 similes that establish the defilements or the contaminations as being adventitious, using these examples, these saying that it is like this particular situation. But it gets at the point that they are not part of the nature of the mind and can therefore be eliminated. So these two, again, are talking about the same phenomenon, but just from slightly different perspectives. And as I said, it's not like it's an absolute throughout all 10 and all 9. You're going to see different ideas that support each of these. But it's essentially trying to understand both the emptiness of the mind as well as the ability for the mind to develop into the mind of a Buddha, because it's not stained from the very beginning. In its pure nature. Sure, we have those stains adventitiously, but it's not the nature of the mind to be stained. All right, now this is where I told you these verses are going to have a lot of parenthetical information in them. This is where Jeffrey Hopkins maybe went a little wild at times, but this is the verse this is one line of the verse. Okay, so it's a 4-line verse. And so this is introducing us to the 10 presentations, and you do have a chart again on them that you can refer to, but the language is going to sometimes be different. I have to give you a forewarning. Once more, we're dealing with 2 different translators here. We're dealing with Gavin Kilty, who did the the commentary by Gyaltsep and then Jeffrey Hopkins, who did the text. And sometimes the charts seem to use Galvin Kilties more than the others. So I don't have much choice in that. I mean, I'm not going to design a whole new chart. I'm sorry. I just, I'll use the materials that have been produced through the basic program, and we just have to deal with that reality. So the entity here is referring to nature, which is on your chart. Let's read this first line anyway, even though it's got a lot of words to it. The entity of natural purity, the causes that serve as means of purification, the effect of separation from all defilements, the function of causing adoption and discarding upon seeing the disadvantages of pain and advantages of pleasure, the possession of the qualities of cause and effect, manifestation of differences in reality by way of the persons on whom it depends. He's just introduced the first 6 topics of the 10 presentations. And we're going to pause there because, let's go ahead and finish this. I was going to talk a little bit about them, but I think I've got a slide coming up on that. Continue with the last 4. States of difference, and similarly, the meaning of omnipresence, that is, reality pervading all, immutability at all times in terms of good qualities, and undifferentiability of the final qualities are said to be the intended meaning of the ultimate basic element, the Buddha nature. All right, a lot of words, right? So we have, and I'm here in this slide, I am using what's on your chart, so you'll be able to refer to these from that. I'm not decided to leave Jeffrey Hopkins and Joe Wilson behind, because what you're mostly going to be using as you go through this is this little chart that, there's a set of charts, 4 charts that are used in the study of this text, and we're using chart 1. Chart 1 starts with nature, which is always going to be in the first column, each of these 10. It goes on to cause, goes to result, function, possession, and categories of manifestations, the different ways in which the Tathagata essence manifests. These 6 can kind of be thrown together because the 6th one then gets elaborated in the last 4. The last 4 aren't meant to be 4 new categories. They're meant to be kind of an extension of the 6th one. So the 6th division manifestation is then further divided into the last 4 of the 10 presentations, which are in chart 1, which are states, the different states in which the Tathagata essence is found, pervasion, the way in which that essence pervades all, its immutability, that it's, unchanging, its indivisibility, the way in which the Tathagata essence cannot be divided up in a sense. Nonetheless, we can, think about different aspects of it. These are ways that we're going to look at as we get into the latter part of these 10 presentations that are, again, an extension of the 6th one. So we're going to jump right in at the first presentation, which is nature. And I had in the Tibetan there this word ngowo. Ngowo is referring to the nature of things, but in this context, it's not referring to any kind of conventional nature. It's referring to kind of its ultimate nature, primarily. But obviously, anytime you talk about Buddha nature, you kind of have both of the components. You have the conventional, which is our developmental lineage, which is our mind with pollution that will be developed into the wisdom truth body. And then we have the naturally abiding lineage, the emptiness of the mind that will eventually become the emptiness of a Buddha's mind, the nature truth body. So the presentation of nature, I'm going to do a little bit. Some of these do come from your charts, and I'm putting them up here on the screen simply so we can talk about them, because there's more information in the charts than what I'm going to talk about. There are some sections of some of these 10 presentations that go into a whole lot of little other stuff that we're going to skirt over it for this course because it makes it way too complicated, plus I don't think I have time, The presentation of nature, the very first of the 10 presentations, shows that the defilements are not the nature of the mind. They are just adventitious and can therefore be removed from the mind because they do not exist by their own nature. If they were there inherently, again, they couldn't be removed because they're inherently there. They are unchanging and existing from their own side. There's nothing that they were caused by, therefore, and so you can't remove the causes of them. Their mode of apprehension is not in accord with reality. This is similar to what we just saw from what His Holiness said, right? They're not seeing things correctly. These, stains are always together with ignorance. And finally, the nature of the Dharmakaya, the wisdom, the truth body of a Buddha, suchness, meaning emptiness, and the lineage are completely pure. So we'll get into this in regard to the individual verses. So we start with the first two lines of verse 30. Like the natural purity of a jewel, space, and water, the nature of the basic constituent is always unafflicted. So this is one of the wonderful things about this text, and why I do like teaching on this text is because in almost every one of these 10 presentations, and then of course when you get to the similes, Maitreya comes up with all these things to compare things to that are really quite useful. I mean, the Buddha did this frequently, right? He said things are like a dream and like an echo, and ways of kind of using experiences that we have to understand the truths that the Buddha taught. So here Maitreya, through his kindness, has come up with these ideas of various things that we can then relate to and understand. Now, some of them are going to be things that are mythical, like the very first one here, a jewel. This is a wish-fulfilling jewel. So essentially, when we talk about these three, the Dharmakaya, suchness, and this lineage, primarily the developmental lineage, we are going to use three things that exemplify them, that illustrate their characteristics. The first one, and by virtue of that, their nature. The first one for the Dharmakaya is that it's like a wish-fulfilling jewel. Again, this wish-fulfilling jewel, I don't have one at home. I wish I did. Then I guess I'd have to have one to wish I could. I don't know. It becomes an endless circle or something. It's said to be a mythical jewel that, you can find and you do these various rituals with it, and you can put it on a post and on the 15th day of some month, which is the full moon day in Tibetan calendar, and it gives you the ability to wish for anything that you want in the material world. It's limited to the material world. So sometimes we say things are like a wish-fulfilling jewel, and that they go even beyond a wish-fulfilling jewel in terms of being able to satisfy at an even deeper level. Space is a phenomenon that is essentially a negation as well. Because we aren't talking about kind of some sort of space you can point at or whatever. We're talking about space being the absence of obstructive contact. It's what it allows you to sit where you're sitting, is that there's an absence of obstructive contact. It's a negation. Because there is no obstructive contact where you are sitting, you can sit there. It is kind of like what emptiness is, suchness is, right? Because it is what allows things to be there because they lack inherent existence. It's a negation as well. Then the lineage, the developmental lineage is what is compared to water, because water is that which kind of moistens and grows and eventually develops completely. So let's look at the verse 31 that kind of goes into this a little bit more detail, and we'll go into the individual analogies. Because of having the power of fulfilling hopes, of not changing to anything other in nature, and of being a nature whose entity is moist with compassion, the basic constituent is qualitatively similar to the features of a precious wish-granting jewel, space, and water. So we see that these three are related to, again, the idea of having the power of fulfilling hopes, fulfilling wishes of others. This is what is part of the Buddha's experience in terms of the Dharmakaya, is that is what enables beings to have their wishes fulfilled, which is the wish to eventually be free of all suffering, to attain enlightenment. The fact of them not changing to anything other, this is, again, that their nature is unchanging. Just like space is always the absence of obstructive contact, so too emptiness is always the absence of inherent existence. In regard to whatever phenomenon, it is the same from one to the other. Then finally, that it's a nature whose entity is moist with compassion, is moist with that quality that helps us to keep growing in the direction of Buddhahood. We need, again, that quality besides wisdom to help us to attain that goal. We're calling it, there are these two wings of a bird that are absolutely essential. There's no way to become enlightened without both wisdom and compassion. So these are the analogies. Let's look at the slides that go into this in more detail. And again, I think this also is from the chart. But the Dharmakaya of a Buddha, the truth body of a Buddha, is like a wish-fulfilling jewel, because by interacting with sentient beings' minds, it fulfills all their hopes. Since this is the case, the Tathagata essence of sentient beings is a wish-fulfilling jewel too. because due to it, sentient beings can attain the Dharmakaya of a Buddha. So we're kind of using it from the perspective of understanding that in the fully enlightened state of the Dharmakaya, it becomes wish-fulfilling for others by doing that. But we already have a wish-fulfilling jewel of the Dharmakaya, of the Buddha nature ourselves. The Tathagata essence ourselves is wish-fulfilling because due to it, we can attain the Dharmakaya of a Buddha, which fulfills all of our wishes. So it's kind of a parallel track here. You've got them in this wish-fulfilling state for others, but then us having the ability through having that Buddha nature to fulfill all of our wishes by becoming enlightened through the force of that. The suchness of the stained mind, this is our Buddha nature, right? Again, our naturally abiding lineage is the suchness of a mind together with contaminations, is like space, because it does not change due to causes and conditions. Again, space and emptiness, in this context, what I mean by space, those are uncaused phenomena. They're negations. You look a little quizzical when I do that, Lynn, when I say that.
Space is uncaused phenomena?
Yeah.
You just said that, okay.
Yes.
Let me chew on that.
And by that we mean a negation of obstructive contact.
That I get.
Okay. Okay. So I don't like talking about space sometimes because it's, I mean, we really get kind of, what are we talking about, But what we're talking about here, that's why I'm being quite precise in saying that we're not talking about spaces that we can talk, look what a beautiful space, or whatever. We're talking about kind of this whole phenomenon that is everywhere, that is an absence of obstructive contact, because it's what allows anything to be where it is. So we are talking about kind of physical space in a sense, but from the angle of this negation. All right, so since it is the mere negation of true existence, just as space is the mere negation of obstructive contact, this is the way that they are the same and do not change. Whether this space is, that this absence of obstructive contact is me being here or the microphone being here, it's unchanging. What's changing is simply what is located in that space. In terms of the emptiness of our minds, that's together with stains, the mind is changing all the time, right? We got all kinds of different thoughts and different things going on, but the emptiness is a constant. It is unchanging, because at any moment in time, it's the same fact, a negation of the true existence or the inherent existence of that mind. The lineage, the developmental lineage, of course, this is just the main lineage that we're talking about here, and we're going to mostly focus on, again, the developmental lineage in this context, but it says, when divided, it consists of the two that we've already discussed. Naturally abiding lineage, the suchness of the stained mind, which is its supporting phenomenon, that is suitable to transform into the nature body of a Buddha, all things that I've talked about. Developmental lineage, the Buddha lineage that is suitable to transform into the compounded body of a Buddha, or bodies of a Buddha. The latter, in particular, is like water, because it is moist with compassion for sentient beings. Again, not that every being has equal compassion in their minds. We're not saying that. We're saying that we all have the seeds of compassion that can be moistened and developed and continue to grow as the developmental lineage forms eventually into the compounded bodies of a Buddha, the wisdom truth body, the two form bodies, and so on. That's it. That's the first presentation. Yay, we made it through that. They get more complicated at times, but nonetheless. This is, again, going back to the beginning, we're talking about these three aspects. The Dharmakaya, which is, pointing to that thing outside of ourselves, but also we're primarily talking about Buddha nature, which is what is within ourselves, our own ability to fulfill our own wishes through developing that into the state of a Buddha, meaning kind of both tracks, our naturally abiding lineage and our developmental lineage, can become the bodies of a Buddha, the uncompounded and the compounded bodies of a Buddha. Then the suchness of the stained mind, that emptiness, it is a constant throughout the whole process, that is absolutely the same. And the developmental lineage, that aspect of it can be the main changing factor. Because while the emptiness remains unchanging throughout all of it, how you attain enlightenment is through changing the mind, obviously. By realizing, the main tool is realizing the emptiness of the mind, the emptiness of all phenomena. Okay? we'll stop there because it's just about 9 o'clock. Any final questions then on this first presentation? Or on anything we've talked about tonight? Again, these presentations will have repetition of some of the material. Yeah, Kim, I'll get the microphone to you, yeah.
At some point, maybe in the past, I was kind of like confused between permanent and impermanence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I could like to request that if you can go through the 4 bodies and
Okay.
then kind of like associate that with emptiness or not emptiness versus permanent versus non-permanent
Or impermanent, yeah.
or impermanent.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got them on the screen now. Essentially, the only one of the 4 that is uncompounded, or that is permanent. And by permanent here again, we don't mean eternal. Don't in our language we often say permanent means that it's eternal. Your mind is eternal, but it's not permanent. Because we mean by permanent and impermanent, we mean unchanging moment by moment versus changing moment by moment. Momentarily changing refers to everything that is compounded, everything that is conditioned. And the 3 bodies of a Buddha that are number 2 in the first category and 1 and 2 in the second category, all of these are impermanent. They change moment by moment. Even the mind of a Buddha, we can say, is changing moment by moment. I mean, it's a constant force in our world, obviously, and it's not having any new concepts or anything, but it's continually knowing everything that exists. And everything that exists is constantly changing, right? So you just have this, and it's manifesting in a variety of ways depending upon sentient beings, always doing something different. The form bodies are always changing and manifesting. So in terms of the permanent and impermanent, or unchanging and changing, only the nature truth body is unchanging and permanent. Why? Because it is an emptiness. Like space, in the way that we were describing it, what we often call uncompounded space, like emptiness, all of those are unchanging phenomena. This is the emptiness of a Buddha's mind, so it is an unchanging phenomenon. It's permanent. In terms of, what was the other part of it? Or compounded and uncompounded, was that the...
So the first one is emptiness, right?
It's the emptiness
And
of a
it's
Buddha's
permanent.
mind. Absolutely.
Okay, so you've mentioned that the remaining 3 are all impermanent.
Mm-hmm.
And what about relative to emptiness?
Relative to emptiness.
Wow, so I'm just trying to kind of like associate the emptiness or this non-emptiness,
Well,
with these 4
right.
bodies.
So these 3 bodies, the 2 form bodies and the wisdom truth body, would all be essentially conventional phenomena. We're not talking about them being ultimate truths, though they are empty. They have their emptiness. Again, the emptiness of the number 2 is number 1 up here. It's only spelled out for that. But obviously the form bodies are empty as well. But we don't talk about the emptiness of a form body. It's just not part of this presentation. But there's no reason why it wouldn't be empty, because all phenomena are empty. So yeah, in terms of emptiness, we can say these 3 have their emptiness, but they are not emptiness. They are conventional phenomena, this being the mind of a Buddha that is completely free of all stains, totally uncontaminated. And then the other 2 being the manifestations of that mind in physical form in various realms to aid, sentient beings. So
So the first one would be ultimate nature, and the other 3 would be conventional.
They are the conventional aspects of a Buddha's experience,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
But they're all empty of inherent existence. There just aren't emptinesses except the first one. Because even the nature truth body is empty of inherent existence. Even emptiness is empty of inherent existence. All phenomena are empty of inherent existence. But the only one that is an emptiness is the first one. The only one that is permanent and unchanging is the first one. All the other 3 are conventional phenomena and are changing moment by moment. They're impermanent. I think I said that right. Yeah. All right, any other questions? Should wrap up pretty soon. I have about 3 minutes after 9, but nonetheless, I don't want to have people, bothered by questions all night or something, unable to get to sleep because you can't answer that question. Yes, Venerable Palmer.
Based on this idea that emptiness is permanent,
Mm-hmm.
because it's unchanging, but then we meditate also on the emptiness of emptiness.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like we're talking about just the nature of emptiness, the absolute nature of emptiness.
That yes,
That
in terms of the emptiness of emptiness, we mean that even when emptiness is analyzed to see how it ultimately exists, it doesn't have any ultimate existence. It lacks any inherent existence.
Yeah. But, it seems to me that, I remember Geshe Dagpa saying that even emptiness comes about due to various conditions. Or maybe he was talking about the realization or realization of it.
Well, the realization of it, absolutely. But in terms of what that mind is realizing, when it is realizing it in that direct, non-conceptual way, not when I'm thinking about it through my conceptual meditation, because then I'm only using a concept of emptiness. I'm not knowing emptiness, the actual phenomenon, just an idea of emptiness. Emptiness, the actual phenomenon, is an ultimate truth that can only, when it's known directly, non-conceptually, not through the medium of an idea of what emptiness is, then it is, again, a totally different experience, and we're knowing the uncaused, permanent phenomenon that is emptiness, that is that absolute negation of independent, inherent existence.
Yeah, I think he probably was referring to it in terms of the like meditation or analysis of it.
Very
something
possibly.
like that. Yeah.
But also, again, when we recite the Heart Sutra, right, it says form is emptiness, emptiness is form. The meaning of that is that you can't have one without the other. You always have to have some phenomenon that emptiness is based on. Now, again, we can say space is also empty. It's a uncompounded phenomenon that has that uncompounded emptiness. But most of what we talk about, form, for example, is a caused phenomenon. So when you have the cause for a particular form, for this glass to arise, then you have the emptiness of the glass. Once there is glass, there is emptiness of the glass. If I go, really mean to the center here and throw the glass out in the street and mean to the people who are going to drive by and have to deal with all the glass, then we no longer have the emptiness of glass because glass no longer exists. So we can say that there are conditions by which one can posit the emptiness of a phenomenon, but the emptiness itself isn't caused by those conditions. I don't know. Yeah, that may also be what Geshe Dagpa might have meant, but I don't know for sure. But I'm sure
think it's similar to that kind of an idea.
I'm sure, it was right in line with this concept, and his wisdom is much brighter than mine. So I'm sure what he said was.
Much worse.
Any other comments or questions? So it is important that if you didn't get the materials, you can access them, like Venerable Carol in the back know, and she'll direct you as to how to make sure you can access them. So if you are coming tomorrow, you can bring that on, if you want to print it out, it's fine. It's not that many pages to print out on your own, but it's a lot for a group like this to have them all here, and especially if people don't want the paper anyway. But if you have a device a reader of some sort that you want to put them on, then you can do that. They're all PDF files that I'm sending. All right, or that Venerable Carol, or whoever will be sending. Yeah, all right, let's do a little dedication. Go to the prayer book that we used at the very beginning of class tonight. And I don't know this prayer book so well, so I'm not sure where the pages of dedication are. Are they where the tab is?
Go to the Tsongkhapa.
Right.
Come back about 2 pages and get dedication.
Okay, okay.
Like the prayer of the flourishing of Tse Chen Ling, is that what you're looking for?
No, let's tonight just do. Actually, stay on that soak page. I like those two at the top. So let's go to you have a little tab that says soak, and it says dedication prayers after soak, TSOG. This is a ritual that we do at the centers frequently, and these two prayers at the top I think are really nice to do. So let's just recite them in English tonight. Through the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. So we're going to do the two prayers that are here. Maybe we'll just do the first two for His Holiness and then for Lama Zopa. But by extension, think that all these holy guides, all these amazing beings that are the three jewels in our lives that are there to help us on our path, and even other ways that Buddhas might be manifesting to help beings, as other spiritual leaders and other traditions. Who knows what dimensions Buddhas might be existing in terms of trying to benefit others. So in whatever ways the Buddhas are benefiting us through these guides and so on, may we continue to have those influences in our lives because we need them to become enlightened. So again, thoughts particularly about His Holiness and Lama Zopa, but extending it out, those two prayers in English. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chen Resig, Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. And then finally, just send this positive energy that we've created out to other beings who you're holding in your heart right now. Each of us might be moved by certain people in our lives or even parts of the world where there's great suffering. And just think about those beings and bring to mind the ways that they are experiencing obstacles to their well-being or illness, maybe even beings who have died recently or might even be dying at this time that we're aware of. And just extend that energy out so it becomes the cause to immediately remove all of their suffering and immediately grant them everything, all the conducive conditions to help them to awaken their Buddha nature, to be aware of that, to use that as a basis for their complete enlightenment. And may all beings be able to develop their minds to that degree and achieve the state of Buddhahood through what we've done here tonight. Wonderful. Good start to the course, I think. So thank you all for being here. And we'll have a roller coaster ride tomorrow, but it'll be well, we'll see how far we get. Again, it's not so important in my mind to get through every bit of it as to make sure there's some understanding of what it is I am presenting, okay? So that's something I want to emphasize. So thank you for your attention.